All right, I believe everybody is here. We'll be maybe joined by one other guest today, but I think this is the full lineup right now. Take it away, guys.
Cool. Well, firstly, I just want to sort of thank Ruben and Yenachar again, kind of agreeing to co-host the Privacy Roundtable with us. It's a great little series. Today, we've got a very special guest, the Beam CTO. I know you sort of gave your name last time, and I'm just really bad at remembering names. But if you sort of want to happily reintroduce yourself, but before we get to that bit, the topic of today is certainly something that I'm really passionate about subject-wise, which is, using distributed ledger technology and crypto technology to essentially improve voting and governance structures, which is a huge topic. And I think everyone in this room probably has something relevant to say or an area of relevant experience. I particularly am thinking of Ruben and Yenachar respectively for their projects here, because I'm aware of the stuff they've done, and certainly with regards to us. But yeah, I'll introduce myself first of all. My name is Dr. Kapil Amarasinga. I am a strategic advisor to the Particle project and Basic Swap DEX. So that's a privacy ecosystem. I would say it's Basic Swap DEX is right now probably the world's most private, anonymous, and secure DEX. Certainly the only DEX in the world that currently permits bidirectional atomic swaps for Monero. And we will soon be incorporating Litecoin with Mimblewimble support via our Litecoin pairings as well. So that's to look forward to. And if you want to buy and sell goods online, commission free, without any KYC or any sort of middlemen trying to exploit you, Particle Marketplace, particle.io, Particl.io. Anyway, over to my next co-host, Ruben.
Hey, yeah, so I'm Ruben, the project steward of Firo. We've been around since 2016. We are behind some of the, I guess, most important privacy protocols. We came up with, we were the first to implement Zero Coin, then Sigma, and then Lelantus, and a variant which is also used in Beam called Lelantus Mimblewimble. And currently we're on Lelantus Spark. We are building a privacy ecosystem called Spark Assets, which allows you to create arbitrary assets that are indistinguishable from each other. I guess very similar to Beam's confidential assets with a different technology base. And yeah, we've also actually had, I guess, some experience in voting. In 2018, we helped the Thai Democrat Party run its elections in 2018, and it was a nationwide with over 127,000 votes cast. And we've actually also come up with an entirely new voting system that can be used for DAOs as well. So, yep, I'll pass it on to Yancha.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm Yenachar. I'm part of the PivX community. PivX is a private cryptocurrency, proof of stake, and I think it's really nice. It's a great topic today on governance. Governance was actually one of the things that initially attracted me to the PivX community. They were, years ago, they were very interested in governance, and I had recently read a book on organizing loosely coupled people. It was written by Rick Falk-Ving. Hopefully I'm getting that name right. He's the founder of the Swedish Pirate Party, and he wrote a great book, Swarmwise, on how to organize people in loosely coupled organizations. And PivX was actually a place where I found people who'd also read the book and could discuss it and theorize on. So I'm really looking forward to today's topic. Yeah, and that's back to you, Dr. Cap.
Oh, and the Beam CTO, would you like to just introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me here again. And my name is Alex. I'm the CTO of Beam. And definitely a very important and relevant topic for everyone, and for Beam especially now, as we're working on our DAO transition. So yeah, a lot of thoughts and ideas we'll be happy to discuss.
That's excellent. So kind of like I mentioned at the very beginning, there are a million different directions I feel we could go in with this. It's a huge topic, decentralized governance. I think where I want to start with it, because I see the potential for this being a multi-episode event or a saga. Well, I actually see it being, potentially an entire series in its own right, and I do ultimately believe privacy should be the key to any sort of functional decentralized governance system. I know for a fact that's how the oral voting system that Firo used worked, because it was done quite elegantly. But the one where I want to start is with PivX, because you kind of responded or made a really interesting tweet about how PivX as a project had lost its core development team on three different occasions. Now, just for reference, Particle, Firo, and PivX all have on-chain governance systems. I don't know if Firo has the
Firo
decentralized
doesn't.
treasury. No, Firo doesn't. My apologies, but I know PivX and Particle has on-chain decentralized governance, and we both utilize decentralized treasuries. And I know that you made a comment that PivX had sort of lost its core devs on 2 or 3 occasions, but because you had this kind of governance and funding structure in place, built in via the setup of your chain, that you were essentially able to hire developers and keep the project going.
Right.
And I was hoping you could maybe start by talking about that, because I feel that's really relevant to the current state of play for how cryptocurrency projects have historically and at present do continue to utilize on-chain governance. I was hoping you could kind of elaborate.
Right. Yeah. Sure. And right, that was a thread. I think it was someone else who brought up the fact that developers had left, but it was true. It was certainly a true statement. And right, it's a great point about the robustness of the system that PivX has, or a system with multiple like power centers, if you will. And I think it's a really important way to look at governance of any organization. I mean, even traditional corporations and partnerships and so forth, is there's always multiple power centers involved in the organization. There's like a formal one, and then there's many informal ones, or like gray eminences, as you might call it. And I think in cryptocurrency, like you mentioned, Dr. Cap, Particle and PivX, they have a formal, like a voting and treasury mechanism, and I really like the one in PivX. Eager to hear more about the one in Particle, and it's a great system. That you vote, masternodes vote, and they vote on proposals where people have first discussed in a forum what they'd like to do and kind of build some consensus, and then they put out a formal proposal that they pay 50 piv to put out, which is a few US dollars equivalent, and then masternodes vote on them, and they put out a payment address, and masternodes vote, and then it's just automatic based on the voting. There's a threshold that you have to reach. It's like 10% of yes votes minus no votes as a percentage of the total number of masternodes. There's like a threshold out there you have to pass, and then if everybody's met the threshold, then they're ranked and paid by ranking on votes. I think that's a great system. I like it a lot. It's not perfect. Nothing ever is. One of the things that's like maybe imperfect about it is there's no way to enforce that people do the thing they're going to do. They get the payment up front. So there's a reputation aspect of it that plays into that. But it's a great system. But I think it's important to look at it as it's not the only like power center in PivX, just like there's not ever any one power center in any crypto. There's also, I think, other big ones are developers. Any cryptocurrency, it's software centric, and software organizations, the developers are a power center. You might say, yeah, they're paid or whatever, but really you need those individuals to add value to the software. So they're always a power center. In cryptocurrency, whales are always a power center. I mean, that's kind of what makes, in my mind, like Bitcoin and Monero, which don't have these other formal mechanisms work, or whales behind the scenes. And then, of course, the people that serve as a face to the organization are a power center, and there may be others. So getting back to your point about so developers leave. There's a power center. Something went wrong. The developers leave. You need an organization where the other power centers are big enough and powerful enough that they can absorb that and recover. And I think that's what has happened with PIVX, and like we're fully recovered, and we have great developers today. And the one thing I would add to that, so it's important to have power centers that can compensate for others when there's a problem, but also it's important to strive for alignment as much as possible with those multiple power centers. That's when things are maximally functional. So I guess that'd be my take on that, Dr. Cap.
No, yeah, I share many of your sentiments there. I certainly agree. One of those things where public faces can be power centers. I find it really funny that I'm a very public face for the Particle Project and Basic Swap Decks. I don't take payment. I am. I don't take any payment. I'm not a formal employee, but because my face is so very public and because I speak so publicly, it inadvertently, and it's really scary to think of that if I give it more than superficial thought, but that is very much the case. Same applies to whales. Kind of going back to what you were sort of asking, power, in terms of our governance structure, we're a particle. The particle blockchain is a proof of stake cryptocurrency. And so we have on-chain voting and on-chain governance features built into that. Now, the way that sort of works is that, people can discuss things, much like you said, in our forums or any of our chat channels. And, if anyone wants to put a proposal forward, we kind of have our own sort of CCS. So it's basically a community proposals page where you can basically put up a proposal, outline it, say, how much you need to get it funded. And then, essentially the community then votes by either so that there's two mechanisms in place. There's kind of the on-chain voting aspect and the proposals aspect. So if you put a proposal forward, you can either fund that and you can basically donate to that. And if it passes, then, it's the obligation of the proposer to kind of make it happen. And as you said, it's one thing getting the funding and one thing getting a proposal passed in paper. It's another thing making sure the person who's put it forward commits to it.
Does it, right.
So there is a human factors element to that. There's a trust element. The other aspect to our governance is, as I said, it's on-chain voting. So whenever it comes to things like, a really good example was our coin issuance policy. So up to, I think, it's going back now. This is such a blur, but I guess 2018, I think we were operating on maybe 2% inflation issuance. And then essentially we had a general consensus vote in order to basically set up our decentralized treasury to fund ongoing development for our team. We basically had a vote where we agreed to increase our supply inflation per annum from 2% to 8%. And 50% of that block reward would basically go to this decentralized treasury, which they then used to fund developers. And every 6 months, we basically have on-chain votes, whereby the stakers in the network, every time a staker proposes a block, it effectively signals a vote. So, those who hold the largest numbers of tokens have the strongest amount of, as long as they're actively sort of staking and they've set their staking so it's engaging in so that the blocks generated are signaling for a particular vote, those stakers effectively have very real stake in the future of the network. We've got quorum limits. I think it's 66%. Again, the exact numbers off the top of my head, I'd have to go back and look. But if you want to do like a real significant protocol change at core level, I think you need at least, I think it's about 2/3 need to vote in favor of it, as opposed to something that doesn't affect our protocol. And then you need a minimum quorum as well, which I believe is 1/3 as well. So you need a minimum
that's
number.
Very interesting. It's different for the nature of the activity. Is that right? Like if it's changing the protocol, you need a higher threshold.
It has a much higher threshold. So we have a general agreement that it needs a much higher participation in terms of, to reach quorum, you need a higher number of blocks participate of the net across the staking power participating, and a much higher threshold to say yes, we're going to get it through. So it's very much models the constitutional change versus non-constitutional change.
To change the constitution takes more than takes a higher percentage in the same way.
Exactly.
Right.
So I think it's interesting. I think it is largely worked. One thing that I would say is just to say back. One thing I would say is that I think what's really important is it's not just about having that structure in place, but making sure, certainly when it comes to funding developers, a really important thing is making sure your underlying system has sufficient liquidity to attract and retain developers. And that's one thing that really, drew me to your discussion in that thread, was the fact that you'd had this on-chain governance mechanism, which was successful, but also that you had managed to preserve sufficient network liquidity to make that a viable solution. So I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that, really.
Well, go ahead.
I think, I'm going to be the devil's advocate after this. So, because I know Beam it's also a governance token called BMax. So I guess, maybe it'll be good for Beam CTO, for Alex to elaborate on his mechanism. And then I'm going to highlight some things that have happened in our past that have made us very, at least personally, I'm pretty against coin voting. But I'll leave that to later and let Alex speak first. Yeah.
So when we started thinking about our DAO and the implementation and how to build it, so obviously we had two completely different governance scenarios. Like we have some things that can be automated within a smart contract and then voted on chain, and then it will happen automatically, as for example distribution of rewards of some protocol according to the voting power of the governance token holders. And it's let's say the simpler case of the two, because you can create a mechanism. Obviously you need to test it and make sure it's reliable, but then once this mechanism is in place, certain parameters, fund distribution, etc., can be voted upon on chain, and it will work as a smart contract. The much bigger problem is, as you mentioned, with things that require human facilitators, whether it's deploying updates or if it is, for example, doing some major changes in the protocol, some things like that. Anything that requires human involvement. Now, so for example, let's say you want to develop an upgrade to a smart contract, and then you want the DAO to vote on this upgrade. So you could theoretically develop it, test it, deploy it, and then let the DAO vote on chain for the activation. But it's a little bit problematic if the DAO votes no, you did all of this work for nothing. So obviously you want to get some off-chain consensus before you actually engage with it. And then when the code is actually delivered and is on chain, then the DAO can vote on activating it on the mainnet. So this is kind of the middle ground for this. This covers some of the cases, but still not all of them. And that's where this problem of developers and key people in the project, face of the project, they all come together, because eventually there are some things that are centralized. It could be some accesses. Once again, everything is possible to duplicate, but it takes time. It's problematic sometimes. Some servers need to be accessed or things like that, even though it's possible to recreate them. You wouldn't necessarily want to do it every time, just for decentralization kicks. And this is something that we actually discussed fairly recently as an idea of how to build all kinds of interesting mechanisms. And by the way, this is also where privacy comes to place, because one of the things that we were debating is how to build a system with shared secrets, where some people control those secrets, but in case those people disappear or are not available or not responding, these secrets can be then accessed by other DAO members with some consensus or some multi-sig or idea. You don't want these secrets to be visible to everyone on chain, but you do want to store them in a smart contract, and this is where kind of encryption or interesting ideas around that come into play. So right now in Beam, we have this kind of DAO structure with two types of proposals. One is more for kind of off-chain ideas, solutions, and proposals that require human intervention, and the other one, which is still work in progress, is for distribution of the rewards accumulated in the DAO. But yeah, like a lot of open questions still. So,
well, Alex, just to be clear, like you were mentioning, like you could like do all the work and compile it into new code, and then vote on it in the DAO. Are you thinking that that would be an automatic mechanism in some way, or would there still be like people involved in making the new release come into effect? How would that final step work?
Okay, so it depends on the implementation. For example, every smart contract in Beam, it has a parameter which is set when the contract is deployed, and this parameter is affecting the time it takes between the new version of the smart contract being uploaded to the chain and when it is activated. This is designed to avoid rug pulls of somebody who has admin access to a smart contract, deploys a smart contract, and then upgrades it immediately and steals the funds. So when you are interacting with a smart contract on Beam chain, you can check what is this parameter, and then you can say, okay, at least I will have 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, whatever, depending on the contract, to understand what was the upgrade about and to make certain steps. So it will not be immediate. Now, after that, you can also create a smart contract that says this update will be conditional. Only if a certain amount of DAO voters will vote on it, only then it will be activated at this point in time and not like without the vote. So you can automate this process.
I see. That's
obviously
very nice.
the deployment of the update needs to be done by the creator of the contract. But once again, this can be also kind of conditionally implemented with DAO in mind.
Very nice.
Yeah, so I guess my turn to speak. And so I just to give some context, I was very involved in the Dash community, which was, I guess, the first, masternode voting, and probably maybe one of the first on-chain voting. I'm not sure whether Decred was earlier. This is also here. And I know PivX basically, correct me if I'm wrong, I think basically your governance system is inherited from Dash, right?
That's
basically
right.
one
Yes.
masternode, one vote,
that's correct.
thresholds, blah blah blah, all of that, right?
Yes.
And
right.
I was a very large Dash holder at one point, and I remember, and I think first of all, when we talk about coin voting, we have to remember that coin voting is basically saying the more coins you have, the more votes that you have, right? It's basically saying that in a country, the richer you are, the more say you have, which is true, but not so direct, right? Like, for example, that what's the name of that really rich, was it Bloomberg? You know, even though he was super rich, he still couldn't really win, right? But when you have coin voting...
Yeah, it was Bloomberg.
Sorry?
Yeah, it was Bloomberg.
Yeah, and now we have to remember that it also depends on the emission cycle, right? A lot of our coin cycles are based on like early large inflation, and then it starts being reduced early on. That means you reward early adopters. Now, if you make coin voting the way to go, it really, really benefits the early ones, right? And I have seen, especially for masternode voting, especially in Dash, even in Firo, we never implemented masternode voting, but I was thinking, wow, if we were to implement it, at one point, Dash was like, I think $100 or $200, I can't remember, which meant to own a vote of Dash, you will need to hold about $100,000 US.
Right, it was big.
Yeah, it's huge, right? And that basically cuts off all of this. And once you have that sort of entrenchment, you can never displace them, right? And Decred system, I know they are one of the Exodus is here. They are also like one of the leaders as well. And you will find that they will always vote in this case, in Decred's case, like the proof people, obviously they're the stakers, they get tickets, and then tickets gives you votes. I may be getting it exactly wrong, but that's like the general gist. And obviously they voted to reduce their hybrid system to cut rewards to become 1% minus 99% proof of stake, something like that. And we've also seen in Dash, whenever there was a hybrid between proof of work and masternodes, obviously when you give masternodes the votes, they kept on slashing the proof of work portion continuously because they are the sole determinants, right?
Right.
Yeah. And obviously people, to kind of mitigate this issue, we can do the delegation thing, to say, oh, maybe I may not have enough to have a masternode, but if I can delegate my vote, there's this delegated proof of stake, DPoS, and then, EOS was very famous for it. And what actually happened was because you are a small fella, a small fish, you don't really care. You're just like, I want to, delegate my vote and get some rewards. They pay me a bribe, right? Basically to go into their voting pool, right? To delegate it to them. And it became basically a oligopoly. And basically these EOS people just kept on voting for themselves to increase their it became like how do I put this nicely? It just basically, and all they weren't actually doing things to benefit Jack, because one of the mistaken things to think is that if I have more coins and a bigger stake in the project, therefore I will vote that is what is best for the project. And Firo actually had a well which had about 20% of the supply, which he had acquired through buying, and also he had actually a founder's reward. And he basically wanted to vote it as such to make masternodes unaffordable for the average Joe so that he and his cronies can control the project, right? And obviously, because we didn't have the masternode voting, I just said, like, look, let's put it to the community vote. Except I don't want people to be just like, oh, yes or no. I want people to state the reason. Like if this is an important issue, I want you to see a reason why you support this thing, which also makes it harder to sock puppet. I mean, yeah, maybe now with ChatGPT it's a bit easier, but back then before ChatGPT, at least you had to think a bit. And the community sorely rejected it. And as a result, it kind of shows that the intentions of someone who holds a lot of coin may be to extract as much value from the project in the short term and then just leave. They may not be aligned in the long-term interest, which is, I find that it is important to to give a lot of Firo or coins or whatnot, but big contributors to the project. Some of the biggest contributors to our project maybe have a little smattering of Firo, maybe they can't afford it, or that's just on me if they just really like what we're doing. And I find that I rather have an active member of the community that's giving good feedback, maybe contributing code, maybe contributing good suggestions, rather than a passive silent well that's just like, hey, tell me what to do, huh? Should I vote this way or not? Which was what happened when I was in Dash. There were people in the core community that would ask me, hey, Ruben, on this proposal, vote this way. The whales are voting this way. And it became like, wow, this is like we are the elite, right? So yeah, that's my two pieces. I could go on for a long time, but I feel that it's very flawed. Yeah.
Well, I think those are excellent points, Ruben. Excellent. And I think, any voting system, there's books written on voting, right? They're all going to be flawed.
Again, I think he dropped off. Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me now? Test.
I can, but Ruben? Just make sure to make Beam CTO a speaker again.
Oh. Well, I wanted to add, Ruben, I think those are excellent points. Now, of course, and you touched on this, but I think it's worth emphasizing. Those like whales and those masternode voters, they are also incentivized, since they own so much of it, to have the project succeed. So if they let their short-term goals of more rewards being paid to themselves outweigh in their mind the long-term benefits of having the project succeed. I mean, in a way that's also flawed reasoning, right? So it's certainly a valid point, but there are counterbalancing forces that make it work when the people who own the masternodes like think through it and vote in a truly optimal way.
I
I'm
would like
just
to think that,
thinking.
but I feel that's very cyclical, in the sense that, it depends who your whales are. And, as you saw in the trade, one or two big like whales that have a lot of power, they just don't like someone or whatnot. They can vote
Right. No, that's true.
of whether it's good for the project or not. And they have an outsized weight to their vote, in the way that's like, why should this guy, just cock block the entire proposal just because he's powerful, right? And that to me is a kind of like, like reinforcing
Right.
the systems that we're trying to break free of.
But I think also look at the model of a corporation, which I think is a fantastic model, right? And in a corporation, there's a board of directors that are like between the voters and the people who do the execution in the company. But and maybe that's the moderating force that's needed there, because certainly a corporation succeeds and the people who own the most of the corporation get the most votes, right? So it's there's a model there that we can look at and see that having more stake deserves more votes, and it works. But maybe it's that board of directors as an intervening entity, at least in U.S. corporations, that moderates that.
Sure, and I think like in any sort of government, obviously the average voter doesn't have all the issues on mind, and therefore they delegate it to their representatives, which has its own problems. But I guess it's the kind of like most workable in between, right? Where you are electing people to represent the project, they have a fixed term, right? And the thing is that there is a very, very good post by Vitalik that talks about on-chain voting, and he's also a huge critic on saying that if it's just about coin voting and it's not right. Obviously, there are also a lot of other things like Futaki, or like, basically where you're voting and then if your outcome leads to something good, then, you get rewarded or something like that. And there's a lot of like quadratic voting, which is used in Gitcoin, where there's some sort of matching ability and all of that, which is also really cool.
Right.
The issue with a lot of these voting systems is that even if they are on paper very good, one of the benefits of, I guess, coin voting is that everyone gets it. Even though it's super flawed, everyone gets it, like, one coin, one vote. It's simple. You have more coins, you have more vote, rather than like, oh, this Futaki thing, how am I going to explain it in a very simple way, or like quadratic voting, right? Or it may be in theory a lot better, but then it becomes very hard to explain to the average voter, right? So there is a balance.
There's also a higher cognitive burden with quadratic voting. I mean, it's not just picking your favorite; it's allocating across multiple choices, and that takes more work for the voter.
Yeah. So let me just quickly, first of all, Beam CTO, you're there. We've re-invited you as a speaker, and please. But what the way that I guess like Monero and like Bitcoin, I would say the governance is kind of messed up. But like in a way, what Monero does is kind of like representative, but not in a very formalized sense. And that's kind of how it works in Firo, like where there is a change, right? Usually we'll start with a proposal on the forums, and we're not going to allow like someone that just registered their account straight away to vote unless it's a recognized member of the community. He's been hanging out in other places, just never registered a forum account. And obviously that requires a little bit of trust on the people that are approving who is becoming who is allowed to vote. but it's also in a way semi-transparent, right? In the sense that, yeah, okay, this person, although he's new, everyone can see that this person has been in the community for at least a certain period of time. And what happens then is that usually we have a feedback period, people weigh in and whatnot. They have to elaborate their reasons rather than just a simple yes or no poll. And if there is generally, I would say, support in one way or another, you can just see from the thread or not, then we will implement it. But if it becomes like very contentious, where it's clear like things are kind of like 50-50, then yeah, we're not going to like implement it. So that means the threshold for passing something is quite high. But it does mean it is kind of informal, which makes it also harder for outsiders to game. But the drawback is that, well, you kind of have to, semi-trust the people that are holding this polls and whatnot to do it in a fair manner. And we try to do as much, and it's kind of transparent because you can see who we are being allowed to speak, whose accounts we're upgrading, and yeah, we are not silencing anyone. So I feel like in the lack of a better solution, and I'm sure there are better solutions, like I think there could be a combination of some coin holding, forum age, and other sorts of verifications and all sorts of things that can be combined to have some sort of weight or whatnot. But yeah, that needs additional work. So,
Ruben, where does
that is something I'm trying to work on.
the funding come from after the voting is done? Is it donations in the same way it is with Monero, like the CCS?
So we do have a funding. We do have a community fund committee, which so there's two funds in the Firo. One which is just like the core development fund. We do what we want with it, but we report how we spend it, right? So that's obviously the centralized component, right? And then after that, then there is the community fund, which was newly kind of created in the past, maybe 2 years or so. And this is a separate fund that is elected of seven people that's elected from the community. None of the core team members can serve on it. And for the moment, they basically administer the community fund. They vote on stuff and say like, oh yeah, should we fund this or should we not fund this? And I think that's like kind of like baby steps to having like a kind of like a representative kind of government. But obviously there is issues. Like obviously when you think about it, especially with regulations and privacy coins being seen as the bogeyman, there will probably be a time where less and less people want to be serving on the community fund committee. But we have to kind of like train the community to be, able to take responsibility over certain things. So like these are like the training wheels, right? And eventually we want even the core team fund to be removed completely and managed by, something with some sort of on-chain voting. But the exact mechanisms, I mean, we have the technology to execute it, but we just have to say, well, who is entitled to vote? How much weight those are the tougher bits that are harder to solve, which we have some idea of, but we have kind of like other stuff that we are working on at the moment, like Spark assets and all.
In the funds, they come. Is there a formal mechanism by which they come? They're created, or do they come from donations? The origin of those funds.
The community fund committee is funded directly from the block reward.
Got it.
We do have donations, which is coming in really helpful, and that's actually managed by a completely independent board called the Magic Board, which also manages certain funds for Monero. And the benefit of the Magic Fund is that there's a committee, we have to make sure that it's scientific, research-based and all of that. But the benefit of having that Magic Committee is that donations if you're a US citizen, becomes tax-free or something like that. So we got like a few $100,000 pure donation. It's been very, very helpful. And yeah, it's really nice to have that because they don't even ask for any coins or whatever. It's just a pure donation, writing off, I guess, tax expenses. So that's cool.
Right.
I have a question. So, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Sorry,
yes.
I had some issues. So, kind of expanding on the previous point that Ruben made, like, how do you feel about like votes being anonymous or not? I mean, is it something that's beneficial to have anonymous voting, or all of them, or maybe some of them? Because as Ruben said, if you are participating in the DAO for a privacy coin, you may not want everyone to know about it. So, in this case, you could just vote anonymously.
Right. It's a great
So I
question.
do think that certain things need to be transparent, and some things need to be private. But it depends on the type of vote, right? When it comes to actually, like, deciding on the future of the project, the direction of certain thing, I think it's helpful for people to see who is that vote coming from, right? In the sense that, okay, this is a prominent member of the community, therefore, like, his vote is kind of like a signaler, right? But at the same time, the other problem is that maybe what should also be hidden is something called ballot progress, right? When the vote is going on, people should not know which way is winning. And that's a lot of problems with a lot of on-chain voting systems where, a lot of times, like, if I see 90% is voted yes, there's very little chance of, why should I spend a guess to vote no, right? But if that ballot progress is hidden, then even though there may be like a lot, it doesn't discourage people from voting no, because they don't know, well, maybe my vote makes sense, maybe my vote doesn't make sense. Obviously, when they are, when it's things to do about sentiment check and whatnot, yeah, sure, maybe pure anonymous voting, which Aura is supposed to be designed where you can verify that it's a valid voter, but not which way a person has voted, like real elections, right? You need to have that kind of anonymous voting. But in those cases, yeah, you don't want to be singled out, you don't want to be like punished for your vote and things like that. Then yeah, but I think different kinds of votes need different kind of privacy. But I do think ballot progress is a really important one, which is a huge problem with people using snapshot or stuff like that, where you can see how the vote is progressing. Yeah.
Interesting factoid, in ancient Rome, different communities would vote one after another, and the communities that got to go first were in a special privileged position for exactly that reason, Ruben, because they could set the tone for who was going to be elected. So if you think about it, being able to vote first, it has some extra power associated with it if the voting process is being tracked.
Yep, definitely. When we designed Aura, I mean, it wasn't entirely designed for like just DAO voting. It was meant to be used like for government elections, like the way that we carried out elections in Thailand. So like in those cases, yeah, for sure, full voter privacy, ballot progress completely, being hidden, because when you're dealing with citizens, it's a bit different, right? But yeah.
Also, what it means to be identified has some shades of gray to it. I mean, you could be identified. You don't necessarily need to be identified as a person. You could be identified as an identity that you've assumed, right? And that identity could be decoupled from the person.
People always talk about like Singapore as a great example. Like even in Malaysia, like areas that vote against like a certain way get cut off from a lot of services. So like there is.
Oh, really?
Even though you said, yeah, they do. Like if you take a look in Singapore, they say like, yeah, it is free, but not necessarily fair. There's a lot of gerrymandering. There's a lot of like things to kind of mess up a certain thing. So in those cases, it's like, like. I guess it's a bit hard, because how do you then say that, we're not going to consider votes? You need to have like certain regional data if you're fighting for certain area. But I think gerrymandering is like a separate problem that I would say on-chain voting doesn't do anything about, because Yeah, I mean, like in US, gerrymandering is a problem. I think in any country, gerrymandering is a problem. And for those of you who don't know what gerrymandering is that basically you are drawing the boundaries of like what a district looks like. Like, okay, this is a Republican district, this is a Democrat district, and I draw the lines to fit me, so that as a result, only a few of the states are actually like swing states, right? And those are the only ones that I have to focus on. And that's an ongoing problem, and especially for people who are entrenched in power. They will draw the lines to favor them, and like, oh, there's a very strong Republican president. If I'm a Democrat, I'm just going to cut out half of them and put them in a Democrat community, so they get kind of like silence and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, probably not relevant to the voting and governance in crypto communities, but just an interesting thought as well.
I think one other important factor in like voting in cryptocurrencies, and it goes back to what you said earlier about some people voting to favor themselves over others. That's different from, say, corporate situations. Is with corporations, at least in the U.S., the corporations, each state has its own system, and some states like Delaware are famous for having really good law that does things exactly like that. It protects like minority shareholders from the big owners, and so there's like this fallback system that's outside of the corporation where people can go for redress, and we don't tend to have that in cryptocurrency, right? We don't. I mean, we can't reasonably expect to say, okay, our privacy coin, we're good. What jurisdiction are we going to go to? How are we going to resolve it? There's not that fallback, and so we need to build more like protective systems right into the model, and I think that's what's happening. Like we're talking about all these different kinds of voting mechanisms, Decred, and look just like the variety we have in this discussion today. And I think it's very formative what we're doing. I mean, what we're doing is like searching out the optimal solution, something that was done. I haven't really studied the history of how corporations came into being, but it didn't just magically appear one day. It came in over time as people tried different things, and it's even still evolving. Right, in the U.S., we had this LLC concept. It's like a next generation corporation that has more flexibility. So I think we need to try. It's great. All of us, we're trying different things, and we feel out how we're going forward and find the best solutions, and it will continue to evolve over time.
Sure, but these problems are also like not new. I mean, governance has been an issue not just for crypto projects, but for civilization in general. For
It's true
like
for tribes.
As long as civilization has existed, right?
But even out in that outside world, we're still experimenting, right, Ruben? I mean, we've got like LLCs, new things. So it's still an experiment in the outside world, and cryptocurrency does bring new things in, like anonymity, online cross jurisdictional things that do merit more. They merit experimentation, I think. You're absolutely right. We have a lot to draw from, don't we? And we should study what has been done and incorporate it. But there's still some new pieces in there, new enough to let us experiment. Like with quadratic voting, that's a fairly new thing, right? I mean, when was quadratic voting becoming popular? Fairly recent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that is also interesting to discuss is that there are a lot of voting systems where there's a lot of checks and balances. And I forgot the exact name, but it was this like Indian tribes. There are like 5 Indian tribes, and like somehow it's a very collaborative process, which focuses more on like achieving consensus, right? And it was something that I did think about. Oh, maybe this is the way we should, approach governance at Firo, where you have different parties, you have the miners, you have the master nodes, you have the code contributors, and all of them. All of them have a say in their own right, and I kind of forgot the exact details, but I remember I was thinking like, this is really great, but it's really slow and it's just so hard to execute, right? And one of the big issues is that generally the better the voting system is, it also becomes more complicated for the average Joe to understand, which kind of defeats the point of the whole thing to begin with.
That's pretty neat, though, that you're thinking along those lines. So would this system like give, like, say, code contributors an explicit vote? I mean, would it be how would that work? I think that's an interesting line of thought.
Well, then you have like people like the stock, the stock airdrop, where everyone was just doing like corrections to the spelling and like getting huge airdrops of stock tokens. So yeah, I mean, like obviously, I'm just very curious, like for like where in terms of like on-chain governance. I mean, I would hesitate to say that maybe coin voting is feasible, but only if you have an emission that is kind of like grins, where you have a fixed emission like for eternity, right? In the sense that
high.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's high, but then over time it becomes like a tail emission. It's
That's true.
fact a tail
That's true.
emission.
Over time, it shrinks as a percentage, doesn't it?
Correct. But I feel like in that case,
Monero works that way too.
Yeah, it's a little bit fairer because then there is, well, Monero had like, a big part of the supply was emitted, and then you had a little bit, while with Green, it's just like a fixed emission all the way. I mean, bad for price, but if you talk about fairness, if you talk about coin voting, that means like, if you do nothing and if you don't like continue to mine or acquire more, your vote is continuously being diluted, which is kind of fair-ish, right? So in that case where there is no reward for being early, then that may be it's I guess a balance between rewarding people who hold the coin and rewarding allowing newcomers to come in as well, because you have that constant emission at the end. So that's something interesting. I haven't seen it really play out, but it's kind of unfortunate that I think one of the things that I also want to really bring up on is that a lot of times on-chain governance usually devolves into governance theater, where people say, oh, look, we have decentralized governance. Look, we are managed by a freaking DAO. And actually, it's like, a bunch of 5-6 people that are basically calling the shots, right? And we've seen this in many, many communities, like even Komodo's notary voting system. I've seen like, I can't even, begin to think like, okay, one on-chain voting system where maybe Decred, I don't really know so much about how distributed the thing is, and I do feel like they have benevolent people who are voting, right? But a lot of the times it just feels like, it's just a very select group of people that are calling the shots. And because of the appearance of a DAO, it kind of like washes away all of this. Like, it's on-chain governance, is fine, code is law, which is, come on, total bullshit. I really hate the code is law thing, because it's like, who set the code, right? It's humans. We set the rules. The code is executing the rules. So, like, come on.
Right.
So, speaking of that, I think a very unique thing that layer one, at least blockchains, have in terms of governance that is very difficult to replicate in the real world is forks. So, for example, when people don't agree with some decisions, and so there is sometimes a contentious fork, and now you have two blockchains, and then people flock to the blockchain that they prefer, and this is also sort of a voting process in a way, right?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, you can fork the country, unfortunately, but the blockchain can do that.
I think that's a good point, and that is often cited as like, oh yeah, this is the way that governance will work. Because if you don't like what we do, you can always fork off the project. But obviously, the longer the project exists, the harder that happens. Like, I mean, take a look at what Bitcoin, it's like this select group of people just decided, yes, the Bitcoin block size isn't going to increase, even though the miners were against it. There were lots of people. Like, I feel like that was like, it becomes very hard because you have, once a certain thing is entrenched, how are you going to justify the exchange? Oh, when you have a centralized exchange, oh, which one's the real one, right? And usually they're going to favor the incumbent, right? And the longer something has existed, the harder it is to fork out something. And the interesting thing is actually Firo or Zcoin, as it then was, is technically a fork because we forked out our scammy co-founder who wanted to take all the money for himself, and that was done with community support. But that was like in month 2 or 3 of the project's life, so it was relatively easy to switch. We managed to convince the exchanges, the mining pools to support us. But if if it was like a very large project, and we wanted to do a fork like that, it's going to be a lot harder. And in that case, it was also kind of clear that the co-founder was a bit of an ass. But
Yeah, but
in more like, yeah, go on.
In other kind of side of that coin, the larger the project, the more interest there is in that project, the more money involved and the more power involved. So, for example, I'm very interested to see what will happen with Bitcoin once somebody decides that maybe this 21 million emissions should be changed, and then like huge amounts of Bitcoin will be by then controlled by large companies that we see happening today. And I think that would be interesting to watch.
Right. That day's coming, isn't it? Somebody's going to try that.
I'm certain at some point they will decide that there is not enough Bitcoin for everyone and try to rectify it through some kind of a fork of this kind. Yeah, that would be the big test, I think, to see how it really works.
They kind of like back themselves into a corner to keep on like repeating the mantra, 21 million. But hey, they managed to say Bitcoin's not supposed to be used like cash. It's supposed to be a store of value and laser eyes and ETF. So who knows? Maybe they can actually convince people to do that, right? I mean, it's just such a joke to me.
Yeah. Well, maybe the right way to look at forking is like it's like the ultimate fallback. I mean, you're totally right, Ruben. I mean, from a practical perspective, it becomes really hard. But if something, it depends on how bad things go. Things go really badly, it's always an option. It's kind of like, going back, we were talking about all these problems humans have faced for all time. It's like the tribe, right? I mean, if things go bad enough with the tribe, you fork off and form your own new tribe, and it's just one more piece of all these many pieces that contribute to governance. It's like the ultimate fallback in a world where you don't have a legal jurisdiction to go to and resolve it.
And another thing that actually happened, I mean, we're running up, we're kind of like at the 1 hour mark, but I just wanted to bring this up because it was pretty interesting. And I don't know if you guys remember this project called Steemit. And Steemit also had some sort of like governance or like voting with coins. I don't know the exact I don't resent the exact mechanism, but I remember one thing was I think Justin's son was trying to, I think had like some sort of takeover of Steemit, and he managed to convince the exchanges who were holding tons of the Steemit tokens that were custodied on behalf of customers to vote his way. And that kind of like, if you say coin voting is the way to go, what are you going to do about exchanges, right? If they vote a certain way, are you going to honor it? Or you say, no, exchange wants, we cannot count it. But if the exchange really wants to hide, they can hide it, right? So how do you tell that apart if exchanges choose to exercise the voting power of the people who custody their funds with them? And that's that I think that is hard to solve if you're just doing on-chain voting.
Oh, that's a good point. Yep. People who are have their funds custodied with someone else, that other person can vote them. Absolutely. I guess the question would be how big of a problem that would be. It certainly is potentially a
Well,
problem.
it broke Steemit for sure.
Yeah, right.
So anyway, I think we are approaching
I think Dr. Cap is having connection issues. You're right, Ruben. We're coming up. Should we see? Are there any questions?
Yeah, that's what I was hoping.
Let's see.
I guess people can put up their hands if they want to ask a question or write in the thread.
Dr. Cap is saying we can maybe add him back as a speaker. Oh, okay, he's added back.
Yeah, Cap has been getting some connection issues.
I've been able to hear you, but I'm back in now. Yay!
Oh, good.
It's I just want to say, yeah, no, we're getting in on 1 hour. I have so much I could say on this, but I feel like there's a couple of things I want to kind of summarize it almost into a framework based on what you guys have been saying. I'm going to basically give my own piece here. I agree. I think there's a lot of flaws with coin voting, particularly in proof of stake systems potentially, or there's a lot of ways to play that system, but I'll basically get to what I'm getting at. Touching on the whole Justin Sun Steemit, do we really need coin voting? Would it be better to have a system of node voting? So one node, one vote, as opposed to you own, 20% of the supply, therefore you have 20% of the vote. Because
we can stipulate it still. And then you start go, let's have a coin holding, then it becomes master node voting.
But I think my whole thinking is if you had one node, one vote, then it kind of detaches that whole, that there's a recognition there that just because you hold the majority of the wealth doesn't necessarily mean you have the best interests of the system at heart. And then the interests of the system may be short term, but they may also be long term. And, you're right, it is very much dependent on the intention, personality, mindset of the whales if you're using a coin holding system. So there's that human factor element. And then it's the aspects of privacy. In my ideal world, you'd have a transparent forum in the sense that you don't necessarily want to know who is voting for what, in my mind, but you definitely want to be able to see and view all of the different arguments for and against a proposal. And you definitely want to be able to kind of look and drill down, and be able to write, arguments for and against. And in my ideal world, it's interesting because you say that there's a somewhat slight difference between citizens voting and voting on a technical project. And I think, without getting too lost into this, because there's so many avenues you can go down. But going back to the idea of a framework, in my ideal world, the participants of a vote would be obfuscated in some way. So you don't necessarily know who's voting and you don't necessarily know in what direction. And then again, going back to that whole, well, what way is a vote going? Is a way to hide the outcome of a vote till the very end so that people don't get demoralized or influenced. And I feel like there's aspects there from a privacy point of view that really need to be considered. I do think any kind of legitimate
let's see, it broke up a little bit for me, Dr. Cap.
Yeah.
Say that again.
Let me see what he
Ask the
said.
question again.
Gosh.
It's not really coming through, Dr. Cap. I don't know if you can hear us.
Yeah, it's not coming through.
It's not coming through. So maybe.
By the way, what Dr. Cap is saying, Aura does all of that. So, I mean, like, it's still like, we don't have any of the cryptographic library, but We have the whole scheme drawn out in the paper. We're actually trying to see if any governments would be interested in implementing it as a polling system to begin with. We're trying to see like, hey, if you can poll your population for opinions without fear of repercussions, that would be a good first step, because like the threat level is a lot lower when it's just polling versus something like, elections. So yeah, I'm really interested to see how that goes. Obviously, although it was like developed by the Firo team, I don't think it's right for us to spend like Firo resources on like a side election type of thing, but kind of came from our work with Lelantis and stuff like that. But I'm talking too much, and I guess we should make sure to open the floor if anyone wants to ask questions or have something to chime in.
Let's see. Do you see any questions? Let's see. See, it looks like Captain Lutz from Pirate Chain. Let's see what is it. Now, Captain Lutz from Pirate Chain is making an issue about privacy by default, and certainly, right. That's there's good aspects both ways, I would say, and many people think privacy by default is the way to go. That's the way it is, I know, with Pirate Chain, like with Monero, and it's good that those exist.
Could be a good topic for the next space.
Yeah, a very good topic for the next space. So thank you, Captain Lutz from Pirate Chain. Pirate Chain's is certainly a member in our privacy coin community. Okay, well, should we? I think Dr. Cap, there's communication problems. Should we?
Yes, we've unfortunately lost Dr. Cap for most of this space, unfortunately. I suppose I do have a quick question for you guys, which I love the point Ruben made about sort of the ability of certain chains to if the supply is not distributed well enough, it can become like a very political issue when on-chain voting is a thing. And I suppose Ruben, you would still like the idea of decentralized governance in an ideal scenario. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yes, that is correct. I mean, I do think that coin holding should maybe be one of the things that entitle you to vote, but it should not be the sole determinant, and it should be a cap on how much weight it happens. But the problem is then how do you prevent like the sock puppets, which is why you need the additional forms of verification, but still remain privacy preserving, right? Because we don't want people to be doing KYC or stuff like that. And I guess, GitHub activity or forum age is, of course, obviously not perfect, but I guess it's better than nothing, especially when you have multiple ways to verify a person's involvement in the community. I think that is, obviously no system is perfect, but it's a lot harder to game if you have to game both the coin holdings, you have to have the coin holdings, you have to have the activity, you have to have the forum age and all of that, and show the reasonings of your voting. I think that would be my ideal system, and I have some ideas on how I would implement that. It's just like, don't have the current resources, but it is something we are heading towards too. Yeah.
I very much liked what Alex from Beam Privacy said about forking sort of being really and I guess the bedrock of decentralized governance in crypto. We do have Offer and XMR that had a question, I believe.
Yeah, no, I was just going to agree with what Ruben just said, but go back to the node voting and bring up how Bitcoin and Monero have like more than 2,000 fake nodes that are sibling the nodes on a regular basis. And if you were just simply not doing hard enough checks on them, you would think that they're real voters or that they're real nodes, right? But they send fake data and they just track users. So, you know, like you can't just, but at the same time, that's one of those things where in Monero, you'll have people that show up and they don't own Monero, they don't run nodes, they don't have anything to do with the project. They just want to come and make noise, right? So that's where it's like, you know, there should be little like if you're doing voting like that, there should be little litmus tests, right? Like if you don't have anything to do with the project, and you're not a developer, you don't contribute in any way, you don't run a node, you don't own any Monero, then why are you here, right? But you have a lot of these people, like where he was saying about like exchanges. Exchanges might hold 30% of the entire coin, and they'll vote to do whatever makes their pockets fatter. So, but at the same time, they probably only run one or two nodes.
Can you guys hear me by any chance?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
I can hear you now.
I just feel kind of following from what FXML has been saying. I think there's something to be said about making sure that you have a really strong distribution system. You want to make sure that before you kind of engage in a governance system, I almost feel that you need to have as maximized social distribution as possible. I think coin voting, when you have heavy centralization of coins, well, if the people to whom that's centralized to are making smart, sensible decisions and the ecosystem grows, that's great. But if they're acting in their short-term interests, then eventually that entire system will fall apart. And there is a tendency for people to, you know, everyone acts in their own self-interests. It's just what those self-interests are. And I feel that, you know, what those interests are, it's very much dictated somewhat by your personality, your neuropsychology, the way you view the world. But kind of going back to that key thing, you know, we shouldn't be having 30% of coins on a centralized exchange.
Right.
We shouldn't be in a position where Justin Sun can, you know, admittedly that was like 8 years ago with Steemit, but that's still very much a thing that can happen now. We should be in a position where these coins should be on decentralized exchanges. If you're going to utilize coin voting, you know, the supply needs to be distributed in order to have a robust governance system. Decision making needs to be distributed if you need to have a robust governance system. And in order to have distributed decision making, you need active participants. And in order to have active participants, they need to be engaged. And in order to be engaged, they need to be incentivized, i.e. the system that you're providing for them is genuinely useful in some way. Now, my big criticism of most cryptocurrency is that it's primarily a tool for speculation. And my big criticism of the last bull market is you had DAOs popping up left, right, and center with governance tokens that people would just speculate on. And it was just a glorified form of casinoing as far as I was concerned, because most of these DAOs, they would raise a ton of funds, but then they would go nowhere. And because their governance was inherently badly designed, and because the intent of their communities was speculative return rather than actually being engaged because they are getting something that is useful in an organic sense, you know, that goes beyond speculation, you know, something that creates value in a very meaningful and lasting way, you know, because you had all of those sorts of participants, a lot of those DAOs subsequently collapsed. So I think when you approach governance, a lot of what you guys have said today is very much about behavioral factors on an individual and on a group level, and incentivization on an individual and on a group level. And, you know, I feel definitely the next topic I would love to do, which is, should we have privacy by default for a governance system? I think that could be an entire topic in its own right. I'd love to have Pirate Chain's guy come on as a guest. And I noticed that we've had Exodus from Decred on as well. You know, if you've got anything to say, feel free to like chime in here. But I really do think distribution and social consensus is a really powerful thing that needs to be factored in here.
One of the things that I just thought about, like, well, I actually basically thought about this back in the Steemit days, was like, if coin voting was going to be one of the things, and how do we prevent exchanges from actually exercising that vote willy-nilly and making sure that the people who are voting with the coins are in it for the long term, right? And one way is to actually, I think in a similar, like in a Decred system, you don't get the right to vote straight away. And one way it's like they say, well, okay, now I'm going to, if you want to get those tickets, you want to get those voting rights, you have to lock your funds for X period of time, which allows you to earn like voting tickets over time. And, if you want to unlock them, there is like kind of like a cool down period. So it makes it very hard for the exchanges to do that, because then they may have a bank run because the funds are being locked or something. Obviously, it doesn't completely mitigate it, especially if it's a fractional reserve. But it's an interesting idea where you can like say, well, if you really believe in the coin, you're going to be willing to hold it for like an X amount of time, versus a masternode system where you can get in, get out, almost like just in quite a fast time. So yeah, that is interesting way to approach it, but of course only addresses one part of the problem. Yeah,
that's a good point. Like Cosmos it's like 3 weeks. There's a lockup period to vote with Atom. So that's a very good idea, Ruben, as a way to address exchange voting.
One of the things with Monero, one of the reasons I feel like Monero is strong is because it doesn't rely on any of the people. Yep, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Monero doesn't rely.
It doesn't rely on any of the participants, any of the contributors having fat
I can
pockets.
hear Yen, but is anyone else speaking?
I know, just me.
Dr. Cap, yes, there is a speaker. I don't think you can hear him, but he's
you can't hear off.
Sorry, I'm going to leave and come back.
Yeah, it doesn't rely on anybody in the community to have fat pockets or anything like that, right? Like you could just be somebody that learns about Monero and knows what Monero is and needs Monero for your day-to-day life or for your country or for your town, whatever. You might not have money, right? Like you might not be able to join in an official voting process, but there's nothing in Monero that stops you from coming and voting just like everybody else. And it goes back to what we were talking about with like not reputation, but with people knowing who you are. Like, of course, you can't just show up out of nowhere and just be a random person and say, hey, I want to change this, and that. But there's a lot of people that hang out in the community, have been there for years and have been contributing, whether it's their peace of mind or small pieces of code here and there, or just trying to onboard people, right? And these people, all their votes should be weighed and respected, and I feel should be weighed even more than somebody who just makes money off of Monero.
Right, Monero has.
I agree, and I think
now it does.
I think one.
Go ahead, Ruben.
Yeah, please. Sorry. I think one of the things that really make Monero, and I'm not saying that Monero's governance is perfect. Some would argue that it's being captured by very weird people and whatnot. I heard mutterings of that, but the main thing is that why Monero's governance also kind of works is that because there's a very strong aligned values. Everyone know what Monero's values are, right? So there's already almost like an informal constitution in place, so that there's already a general direction. And that if you want to have your voice heard, and there's already a strong community enforcing that kind of like manifesto, then you have to align with those values as well, right? So that kind of acts like a informal kind of like litmus test, right? So I think that's cool, and this type of governance only kind of works if you have a strong, already core group of community that are aligned and that are, I would say like semi-benevolent, right? They are not going to shut down people, and that there's very key, anti-censorship and all this type of values, which keeps that kind of working. But yeah, it can be subverted, but
there's also
governance is working, and yeah.
Right. Even though you can show up, and it's a very good point with Monero, you can show up and you can have a voice, but ultimately the funding for Monero comes from donations, right? And like there's the mechanism often works. There's many small donations, and then a whale comes through and like tops it all off, right? Or tops off the ones they want to fund, and so there's still an aspect of that of the big coin holders, the whales, having influence through donations.
But that goes back to Monero having its principle. There's lots of whales out there whether it's governments or whether it's Binance themselves, that want Monero to win but can't say so. And because they can vote privately, they'll donate the Monero without thinking twice.
Oh, right. I think it's good. I'm just, but it is an element. All I'm pointing out, in absolutely. I mean, it's good and it's working, but there is more to it than just like the votes, right? There's an element of it of holders having an influence too.
Well, in Monero, a lot of times we'll do the work before the money comes, so it's not really, the money is like nice, but when CCSs fail, we've got the general fund to back it up, and the general fund is mostly funded by small donations that trickle in on a regular basis. You can see the fund watch account on Twitter. You can see like $2 coming in all the time.
Well, wasn't there some objection to retroactive funding?
That was because I was banned. And bad actors
okay.
bad actors that stole $25,000 from CCS wanted to stop full chain membership groups. So, stuff happens. But I came back and we made sure we got that merged.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, I have to go soon. It's like 11:20 p.m. I mean, I think we're kind of running out of time, but you guys want to continue? Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I think we're at a good stopping point. Why don't we?
Yes, I don't believe we have any more questions. Thank you so much, guys. That was very interesting. We could have 3 of those, I believe.
We could.
Thank you so much to Alex from Beam for being with us today. And unfortunately, we lost Gap for much of it, and very good points by our friend Alfred as well.
Yes. No, the good thing is,
you guys very much.
I just want to thank you guys. I could hear most of you throughout. For some reason, it was cutting me out of speaker, but I'd definitely love to continue this conversation at a later date. And I think, as mentioned, kind of this discussion of privacy by default, I think as the standard of governance, certainly that's a topic I'd like to explore further if you guys are cool with it.
Sounds good.
Very good. Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you, Alex, for joining us today.
Hey, thank you.